Okay, hello everybody. My name is Jacob Arbogast, and I am the director for the Center for Excellence in Finance at CSU Chico. And this is a presentation on the Introduction to Personal Finance for Butte County Library's REACH program. And so I'm just going to walk you through a little bit about some personal finance topics, and we're going to kind of go step by step as we go here. So just kind of some background for everybody. If you're watching this presentation live right now, then you probably already know about the REACH program through the Butte County Library. But for those of you who are watching this later, this is a recording and is going to be posted on the website, so you can go and see this as well. But the REACH program is for all of Butte County and is available on buttecounty.net. If you go to the link to the Butte County Library and the library services, and you can see the REACH program. And we do a series of workshops on all kinds of topics for things like personal finance like this, or things for business owners or job seekers, all kinds of topics that people in our county want to know about. And so this is the first of the personal finance series that we're putting on in collaboration with the Center for Excellence in Finance at Chico State. And so future topics that we'll cover will be things like credit scores, credit cards, saving for retirement, tax planning, both for individuals and for businesses, things like talking with your kids about money, all kinds of topics. And we're going to keep going with these through the months ahead. And so I highly recommend you go to the REACH webpage and check out the calendar for future workshops. Some will be live, like this one is live right now. Some will be pre-recorded, and you can go and see some of the pre-recorded videos that are on there too, of all kinds of topics, whatever is applicable to you. And so a little bit about me, why I'm here talking to you about personal finance. So like I said, I'm the director of the Center for Excellence in Finance at Chico State. And part of what we do at the center is we run the Financial Wellness Clinic, which is a financial planning office on the Chico State campus. And I teach students and coach students who want to become financial planners on how to create financial plans and work with clients. Previous to working at Chico State, I was a financial planner. I had my own business. And so that's kind of my background a little bit, and kind of how I came to be here to give this presentation. So a couple housekeeping items for those of you who are here in person. You can click the chat button at the bottom. Hopefully most people are familiar with Zoom at this point, but just in case you might not be, the chat will allow you to type in the chat box to me. You can either type in chat to everyone, or you can direct it specifically to me if you have any questions or anything that you have any issues with as the presentation goes on. Or if you don't want to type, you'd rather ask out loud vocally, you can click the reactions button, which will pull up a series of reactions that you can choose. And raise hand is one of those. And if you raise your hand, I will see it. Zoom will tell me that there's somebody with a raised hand, and I can call on you and you can ask a question if you want to do it that way. Either way is fine with me. I'm fairly casual when it comes to presentations like this, so I'm happy to answer questions as they come up. So I thought maybe we'd start with a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. I have a few favorite quotes about financial planning topics, but Winston Churchill said, "He who fails to plan is planning to fail." I also saw this attributed to Ben Franklin, so not 100% sure that it was Churchill who said it, but I think this is a good place to start. So if we're going to talk about personal finance topics and financial planning, having a plan, actually having a plan that you can work and work your way through is really the most important key here, right? We need to say, if I don't have a plan in place, well, then how do I know if I'm going to be successful or not? How do I know when I'm successful? Did I meet my goals? If I don't have a plan, how do I know if I met my goals, right? And so I need to have something, even if it's not extremely detailed or long-term. You can have short-term plans, you can have short-term goals, you can have somewhat vague. We're going to talk about goal planning here in a little bit, but we need to have something in place so that we know when we look back, did we accomplish what we intended to accomplish, right? And so I like to start talking about financial planning with this quote, because I think it's a good place to start with. So some categories of personal finance. So what we do at the Financial Wellness Clinic is we work with the CFP board's financial planning topic list. The CFP board, CFP stands for Certified Financial Planner, and it's a certification that financial planners can have, but the CFP board, the Board of Standards, kind of publishes financial planning topics and topics about personal finance. And so I use that as a kind of a jumping off point when I work with clients or when I talk to people about personal finance. I use that as kind of a starting place. And so you can go to their website and see it, but we're going to talk about it right now. So some of the categories that are really important to think about when you're setting up your financial plan for yourself is budgeting and net worth, which is what we're going to talk about pretty heavily today. But some other areas to talk about would be retirement savings, tax planning, estate planning. Estate planning is things like wills and trusts, things to do with your property after you pass away, insurance and risk management, investing, education planning. There's a lot of different reasons that somebody might want to invest. Most people think of retirement planning, but you might also want to invest to save for costs of future education, or even the last one on here, which I'm a little disappointed that it's the last in the list, because I think psychology of financial planning actually should be much higher up on the list. But how you think about money, how you interact with money, how you make decisions. There's a whole area of financial planning that's focused on the psychology we call behavioral finance, is how people act around around money topics. And that's a really important piece for all of these, because when you're setting up your plan for yourself and how you're going to manage your own personal finances, how you react to maybe having too much debt or more debt than you'd prefer to have, or how you react to a shortfall in your budget, or even how you react to having more money than you expected. Some people will tend to overspend. Some people will tend to save more than they need to. People have different reactions. And so the psychology of financial planning is absolutely critical here as well. So these are some of the topics that the CFP board outlines as important when considering creating a financial plan for yourself. And we'll kind of go through those. We have workshops that cover all of these different areas that will be happening over the next few months as well. And so you're probably asking, okay, that's great, but where should I start for myself? I need to know about my own personal finances and set a financial plan for myself. Where do I get started? How do I start implementing this? And so again, I prefer to use the CFP board's 7-step process, and we'll go through that step by step here in just a second. But I just kind of want to give the caveat that the CFP board is a certification, or CFP is a certification for financial planners. And so when the CFP board developed their process, they purposely created it for financial planners to use when working with clients. And so I'm going to modify it just a little bit, because the context of this presentation is that you're going to be looking at your own personal finances. And so you don't really need to present your financial recommendations to yourself. You are the one doing it. So I'm just modifying them slightly, but we'll go through the 7-step process here on how to utilize this for yourself. So the 7 steps are understanding your current circumstances, both personal and financial. So financial circumstances we probably know of as, how much money do we make? How much do we have in savings? Those kinds of things. Personal circumstances might be maybe somebody has like a health concern that limits the type of work they can do or the type of income that they can have, or they have a living situation which makes things either easier or more difficult, those kinds of things. So that's kind of the first step, is saying, okay, where are we now? And what kinds of considerations do I have to look at as I develop my plan for myself? And then we're going to identify and select some goals. We're going to talk about how to determine goals, how to set goals, then analyze what are you currently doing? What's your current course of action? Are you on the right track to meeting the goals that you want for yourself? Or for most Americans, they're not. They're not on the right track. In general, statistically, many Americans don't have enough money to pay for, I think it's something about half of Americans don't have $1,000 in savings to pay for an emergency, right? And so many times people's current course of action might not necessarily be putting them on the right track to reach what their goals are. So we'll talk about how to look at that in just a minute. Then again, this is created for financial planners, but if you're doing it for yourself, you might develop some recommendations for yourself, but you might develop, okay, so now that I know where I am and what my current course of actions are, where they're leading me, maybe I want to make some changes. You might develop some of those changes. And then step 5 would be presenting those recommendations. Again, a financial planner might present those to you, but if you're doing this for yourself, maybe you have a partner or a roommate or a spouse or somebody and you might work with them so that you can have kind of be on the same page. And so maybe present to your partner, or maybe not necessarily present to yourself. And then we'll implement the plan, and then we'll monitor our progress. And that's kind of one of the key focuses here too, is after we've done everything, we need to make sure we're on track. And so we'll talk about ways to monitor progress at the end. So let's go step by step. Understanding your current circumstances is the first step. And so some things that you might want to think about is, where are you on your financial journey, right? You usually spend more than you earn each month. Do you regularly have extra money and you don't know what to do with it? And the main question I ask when I'm working with clients, or when I'm working in a financial planning capacity, is, how do you know that? So if you're saying, well, yeah, I do often spend more than I make, how do you know that that's the case? And of course, if every month you're struggling to make ends meet, okay, then that might be pretty obvious to you. Or do you regularly have extra money where you don't know where to put it? How do you know that that's the case? And so the very first thing I do is I say, well, let's look at budgeting. And most people struggle with creating a budget, at least in my experience. But creating a budget in the first place is where people kind of get lost, because they're not sure what things to include, how much, what's normal. They kind of, for at least the people that I've worked with, they kind of think of all the different costs in their head, but they never actually write it down. And so I highly recommend having something written down. It doesn't have to be written by hand. You can do it on a computer, like a spreadsheet or something, but or there's tons of apps, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But there's all kinds of different places where you can create a budget, but it should be written down so that you can't kind of change things unilaterally and say, okay, well, I'm just gonna I forgot how much I said here, so I'm going to think maybe it was this amount. I always have like a notebook handy, right? And I can, write down, okay, here's how much I may know for sure what my rent or mortgage payment is. And I may know for sure what my car payment is, but how much did I spend on food last month? It's hard to, add all that up in your head. And so having things written down is a great place to go. So I always recommend creating a budget and going back a few months, at least 5-6 months, to look at kind of trends of what you're spending on different categories. And we'll talk about how to create a more detailed budget here in just a second, but go back a few months, add up the different expenses that you have in different categories, and then also consider what was going on in your life at that time, right? So we've all recently had huge changes to our lives, and that might have changed our spending patterns, right? When we first started working from home, my wife and I ended up eating out a little bit less, right? Because we weren't going out to restaurants as much when we were kind of, locked down in home. But we also changed kind of our hobbies. And so I have kind of expensive hobbies. And so I ended up spending a lot more than I anticipated on those kinds of things. And so, our life circumstances changed a little bit. And so we need to consider those when we create a budget as well. And so how do I create a budget? Well, there's a few ways you can do it. And this is where we get into that psychology piece that I talked about earlier. It depends on you and how you react to information and money and topics like these. And everyone's going to have their own way of looking at this. And so depending on the type of person you are, I'm a planner. My wife is also a planner. That might be why we get along really well. We like to have things written down on paper. And so again, I have this notebook that, we write things down. We make sure that it's all written out there. But some people don't want to have it physically on paper. They're afraid they'll lose it, or that's just not the way that they work. That's not the way their brain works. Absolutely fine. You don't have to handwrite a budget. There's lots of apps nowadays. People are very, tech savvy, and there's a lot of options available for software that can provide these kinds of services. So mint.com is probably the most well-known, I would think. Another one is called Spendy. Both of those work really well. There's actually many. There's the one called YNAB, which stands for You Need a Budget. And there's so many different apps available. The apps will a lot of times connect to your bank account. So if you use a debit card for most of your purchases, Mint, for example, I'm very familiar with Mint, and they will connect to your bank account, import all the transactions that you used on your debit card, and categorize them for you and say, look, you spent so much. This is what this graph right here on the side is you spent so much on home purchases, you spent so much on food and dining. And not only does it give you this pie chart, but if you hover your mouse, this is just a picture, but if you're on their website and you hover your mouse over the pie chart, it'll tell you the amounts that you spent on each of those. And so you can see oh, look, I'm spending, a little bit too much in food and dining, because that's a big part of this this pie chart here. You say, okay, so maybe I want to reduce the amount of going out to eat that I'm doing, and maybe try to, cook more at home. Or shopping might be too high, too high of your budget or something. And so you can keep track of those a little more easily with an app. And if you like to have everything inside your phone and you do everything from your phone, like a lot of people do nowadays, that's probably a great, option for you, because you are already there all the time. You have it with you constantly. If you're the kind of person that wants all of your financial stuff to be in one place, you like to kind of compartmentalize parts of your life. Maybe since you already do banking with a bank, hopefully, then if your bank also provides budgeting software or useful budget tools through online banking, you might just want to have all those things in one place. And so that's a great option as well. One of the things that I do with my bank is I can download all of my transactions and then categorize them myself. And so I do that as well, just to kind of have a second eye on everything. And so that's a good option as well. And then Excel or Google Sheets also have budget templates built in. And so if you open Microsoft Excel, one of the things that first comes up is what kind of sheet do you want to open? And there's a bunch of choices for budgeting depending on your lifestyle. There's college level budgets, which is, I work with college students a lot. And so college budget makes a lot of sense for the kinds of people that I work with, but there's budgets for events, right? There's a wedding planning budget. There's all kinds, birthday party planning budget. There's all kinds of different things that exist on there as well. So any of those works great too. So what kinds of things need to be in a budget? Well, I typically like to group all of my expenses by category. And the way that I do it for myself is I have 2 categories, and then I also tag everything as fixed or variable. And so that works really well for me, but it may or may not work well for you depending on your style. But the major categories that you might want to categorize your expenses by would be like food, utilities, entertainment, transportation, any of those kinds of things where it's kind of a big umbrella, category. And that way you can keep track of, okay, maybe I'm overspending. Like if let's say utilities is really high, you might say, you know what, maybe we turn down the thermostat a little bit. Or if entertainment is very high, you say, listen, we've been going out to eat a lot, or we've been going to the movies a lot. Maybe that's not so common, right now, but that's kind of the historical example is you go out a little too much. Maybe you want to tone that down a little bit. Maybe go out once a month instead of every weekend, right? Something like that. And so you can, have these kind of big categories. And then another thing that I do, I said I have 2 categories plus, I have 2 categories plus I do fixed and variable. And so that second category is a little more detailed. The first one is a big category, food, utilities, entertainment. And then the second one is more specific. I usually put the person or the company or that provides whatever it is. And so if it's food, it might be, a particular restaurant, or it might be Safeway or Raley's. If it's, home, I might put Home Depot, or I might put, Lowe's or something like that. And so I categorize it by actual vendor so that I can also see, if food is really high, I can then say, okay, well, of all of the food expenses I have, what things am I spending here? And some of if it's a lot of going out to eat. So for example, Olive Garden would be a really high one in my household, I guess. And so maybe I say, listen, let's not go out to eat or order, from there as much. Let's try to go to the grocery store, and then maybe we'll spend less on eating out, but maybe a little bit more from Safeway or Raley's or something. And so hopefully we end up spending a little less in the food category overall. You could also separate food, this is just an example for food, but you can do this for anything. Separate those into more specific categories, like going out to eat versus groceries. Those are 2 different areas of food expenses. And you could do that as well. It depends on how you like to think about money and your spending and your lifestyle, what makes the most sense to you. So other circumstances to think of. So if you have a budget, perfect. That's great. That's a great place to start. Something else to consider is a net worth statement. And so a net worth statement is looking at all of your things that you own and all of the things that you owe. And we call them assets and debts. Sometimes debts is called liabilities, but it's all the stuff that you have available that has some value, right? If you own a home, there's some value to your home, but you might also have a mortgage, right? Which is a debt that you owe on the home. And so there's a difference there. And we might know that as like equity in our home, but you can make that same argument for anything, right? You might own a car with a car loan. And so there's some equity in your car. You might own lots of furniture in your house that has some value to it, right? There might not be a loan on your furniture. Sometimes there could be, but that's not as common. And so you might have just all equity on that, but you might own a lot of things, right? You might have some investments, you might have any kind of property that has some value to it. And then you take all of the debts that you have and you remove those debts that you have that might not have property associated with them. Would be like credit card debt or student loans, where you owe some money, but it's not directly tied to a specific property. Those are some debts that you might have too. But if you take all of the assets that you have, everything that you own, and subtract all of the debts that you have, everything that you owe, you're left with some amount of equity. And we call that net worth. And so if you have a positive net worth, that's usually a good thing. And it depends kind of on where you are in life. Usually younger people tend to have a negative net worth, and that might be because they haven't really accumulated a lot of assets. If you're just maybe turned 18 or you're in your early 20s or something, you probably don't own a home yet, and so there might not be a lot of equity in a home. You may have a car loan, but you might not have a very nice car if you're particularly younger, so you might not have a car that's worth much, and so that might be a negative net worth. But really what you want to do is, it doesn't necessarily matter what your net worth is right now. What we want to look at is trends. We want to say, well, is my net worth increasing over time? Am I getting a more positive net worth? Maybe it's still negative overall, but it's come up and it keeps going. And over time, we want to try to increase net worth, either by paying off debts. That's one way to, if we have less debts to subtract from our assets, then we're going to have more positive net worth, or by accumulating more assets. I could buy a house. I could buy more, property or something that has some value to it. And those are ways to increase net worth. And so that's another thing to consider. And so budgeting and a net worth statement are good starting points. And I'll show you some links to where you can get a budget template and a net worth template from some good websites once we get a little farther into this. And so how do you track your net worth? Take all of your assets, remove all of your debts. There's a website here. I'm gonna actually open it. And I'm gonna change my screen share to share my screen here. There we go. So I think everyone should be able to see this, so that this is just one place where you can get a net worth statement, so that you can kind of list out some of the things. You can see there's liquid assets. Liquid assets means things that are pretty close to cash, things that can become dollars very quickly. Personal use assets, stuff that you're actually using, but it has some value to it. Investments would be assets. Current liabilities would be things that you have, debts that you're making payments on right now. Long-term liabilities would be major debts that you're going to be paying over a long time. And then you take your assets, subtract your liabilities, and you get your net worth. And so you want to just do this regularly. I'd say if you do it once a year, that's probably fine. If you're particularly active and really passionate about budgeting, you might do it every 6 months, but I wouldn't do any more frequently than every 6 months. I think once a year is fine, and you can kind of track it over time. Let's go back here. And so I would say, track your net worth over time and kind of see as it increases, hopefully your net worth becomes positive and then becomes more and more positive. And that means that you have, you've accumulated quite a bit of wealth. And that's a good way to go. Okay, so we've covered step one. We're going to go through the rest of the steps too. So the next piece is you kind of know what your circumstances are, and you need to select some goals. And so whenever I'm working with students or clients, I always say, let's create goals using the SMART goal template. And so SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And so each of those pieces kind of describes what your goal needs to include. And so a specific goal is one where you really know what you're saying. You don't want something really vague, right? A lot of times, especially this is January that this is recording right now. And a lot of times with New Year's resolutions, people say, well, my New Year's resolution is to save more money. And that's not very specific, right? Save more money doesn't, include any detail about what save $1, that's more money. That's not really, very descriptive. And so we're going to go through step by step what each of these are. And so one goal that you could have that meets all of these is, I want to pay off the balance for my American Express card by the end of the year. And that's $3,200. And then, so that could be a SMART goal. And does it meet each of the criteria? Well, it's specific. Yep, I say the exact credit card that I'm going to be paying off and the amount that I'm going to be paying off, $3,200 on my Amex card. That's very specific. And when I say pay off, that means I'm paying it down to zero. So yep, absolutely. Is it measurable? Yes, because I gave an actual dollar amount that I'm starting with, and that I'm ending with. And so it's very measurable. I know exactly the amount that I'm going to be paying. If your goal was something like save more money, well, then you might want to say, I want to save a specific dollar amount in a specific savings account. And that way, you know, one, it's specific, and two, it's measurable, right? You have an actual dollar amount that's measurable. You know whether or not you met that account balance. That would be a measurable goal. Is it achievable? Now, this is subjective, right? For me, if this was my goal, I would be able to, that's something that I could do, but depending on your lifestyle and your personal finances, you may have something more extravagant than that, right? Or you may have something a little more modest, right? You might say, well, I just need to pay off $100, right? And it depends on where you are in your life and what kinds of circumstances are going on. And that's why we measured our circumstances first, so that way we now know, are my goals achievable now that I know kind of where I am. Relevant means it has to be something that is relevant to you, something that's important to you. Will it help you achieve something that you want, right? And if this was your goal to pay off your American Express card, then relevant would be something like, well, my debt to income ratio is too high. And that would be something if you were maybe going to try to buy a house in the near future, you might say, listen, I need to lower my other kinds of debts in order to qualify for a mortgage. So this would be a relevant goal for that. I need to pay off some of my other debts, otherwise I'm not gonna be able to qualify for a mortgage. And then is it time bound? And yes, so on this one I said by the end of the year. And so if my goal was to have this done by the end of the year, that's time bound. I can say, as I progress through the year, am I getting closer to my goal, right? If it's July, am I about halfway to my goal for the year? If it's November, am I getting really close to having it done? If I get to those time periods and I see, oh, you know what, it's July and I'm not really halfway to my goal, I might want to, you know, kick it up a notch a little bit. Or if I get to November and I say, oh, I still owe $2,900 on my Amex card, well, then I'm really not close, right? And so that's probably earlier than that should have noticed that I wasn't on the right track, right? And so time bound says to you know, apply a specific time period to your goal so that you know whether or not you're going to achieve it. So identifying and selecting goals, I use the SMART goal thing, but depending on what your goals are, if it's to buy a house, to pay off debt, to save some more money, use that SMART goal template. So the next step here is to analyze your current course of action. That's what are you doing right now? And are you going in the right path to reach those goals that you outlined for yourself? And so we already created a budget. That's perfect. So current course of action, if we look at our monthly budget over the past few months, we can say, you know, has my savings account increased, or has my debt been paid down? In my monthly budget, did I put one of the lines on my budget is a payment towards my debt? If my goal is to pay off debt, did I do that? And so now I see my current course of action is, you know, I'm not paying enough on my debt in order to get it paid off by the end of the year. And so my current course of action might not be getting me where I need to go. And so instead I might say, okay, well, looking at my past few months, I'm not going the right direction. And looking at my next few months, I need to increase the amount that I pay towards debt. And in order to do that, I might need to decrease the amount I spend on entertainment or something, any of the other areas of your budget where you might need to decrease a little bit in order to increase your debt payments. And so now that we kind of have this you know, historical look back, we can plan for the future and say, okay, here's the changes we need to make in order to go towards the goals that we just outlined. So what changes can you make in your goal or in your budget to try to achieve your SMART goals? And then if your change is, well, I need to spend less money, well, I'm going to go back up and say, we need to be more specific. We need to be measurable. We need to say, okay, how much less from where, right? And then we need to make sure it matches the rest of our budget. Is it achievable? Is it something that we can do, right? All of these kind of, you know, it's a step-by-step, one at a time, but as we progress, we have to look back too. And so some of these steps are kind of working together to be the most efficient here. So so now that we've kind of analyzed where we are, now we say, okay, so we know what our budget looks like. We know where we are. Now we need to make those changes. So this is where they kind of start flowing together pretty well. So if you were working with a financial planner, they might develop some recommendations for you. But if you're doing this for yourself, which I assume most of the people who are watching this video will be doing this themselves, then you don't necessarily need to, you know, take information away, develop something and bring it back. You're right there. So you can just do it for yourself right now. But develop some recommendations. What are the changes that you're going to make in order to reach your goal? So I'm going to kind of refer back to that pay off the American Express card, right? pay off the American Express card by the end of the year. It's about $3,200. We're going to kind of reference that goal. And so what are the recommendations for myself? What am I going to do to make sure that that happens? Well, if I paid about $300 a month over the course of a year, that's about $3,600. And on an American Express card, that's a credit card. And so there's some amount of interest. And so I might think, okay, that's probably going to pay it off over the year. $300 a month for the course of a whole year would be about $3,600 for the year. And if my balance is $3,200, if I include interest, then that's probably pretty close. And so that might work. We can do the math to see if that actually will work. But for right now, let's kind of keep it, a little open-ended. And so I say, okay, $300 a month. Am I currently paying $300 a month on my credit card? If I'm not, then I need to increase it. If I am, then good. So I'm going the right way. So my recommendation might be, I need to up my payment on my credit card to $300 a month. And so take away from somewhere else, or take away from savings, or take away from my entertainment budget or something like that. So now that we kind of know where we are, where you want to go, you can start making those changes. But I can't give everyone just a straight here's what you do, because it depends on your own lifestyle and those kinds of things. So recommendation 1. So if your budget from step 1 shows that you overspend on food, and your goal is to get more money into your savings, well, then you might want to reduce eating out, but can use that, whatever you reduced from your eating out expenses, to increase your savings. That might be one thing you could do, right? So that would be an example. Recommendation 2 might be if your budget shows that you spend more than you earn every month. So at the end of the month, all of your expenses are more than your income, then you're going to have negative cash flow every month. And so you might want to get to a positive cash flow every month. And so in order to do that, you might say, well, I'm going to reduce the amount that I'm paying on my debts, which might sound counterintuitive, right? Well, if I pay off my debts, if I put less money on my debts, I'm just going to be in debt longer. Yes, but you need to also have some sort of an emergency fund and some savings. And so you kind of have to prioritize which things are more important here. And so I'm assuming that when you created your goals, you were prioritizing what's important to you. And so if getting to a positive cash flow is important to you, then you might pay a little bit less on some debts in order to pay a little bit more on another debt that has a higher interest rate, so that hopefully you can eliminate that debt pretty quickly. Or you might pay just a low balance debt so you can get rid of it entirely pretty quickly, right? Those are different options. And so those are some things you might do depending on what your own life circumstances are. So now you have some recommendations. So now you say, okay, well, if you were working with a financial planner, they might present those recommendations to you. So I'm going to combine 5 and 6 here and say, we're going to take those recommendations and we're going to implement them. And so if you're going to implement some choice, right, you've said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I need to implement it. And so I might want to break that down into, rather than a whole year's worth of time, right? The original goal was pay off the American Express card, $3,200 over the course of the year. That's a really big goal, right? It takes up an entire year. That's pretty tough to do. But if I said, hey, I need to change the amount that I pay on debt so that I'm paying $300 a month or something, if I break it into monthly steps, that might be a little easier to do, right? And so don't say, this is what I want to do for the year. Say, this is what I want to do for each month. And then as you progress, you check off the box each month and you say, okay, did I do it in January? Yes or no? Did I do it in February? Yes or no? And you can keep a little timeline. We have in the guest room in our house, we have a big whiteboard and we have notes on there and stuff. And we have a little timeline that says, okay, we checked the box for this month. Did we make our goal? And we have it for a few different goals and stuff like that. But that might be something you do. Or if you're doing everything on a notebook, you can just have it on your notebook too, where you have your budget. The next page is your checklist by month. And you say, yep, did it for that month, did it for that month. And you can keep referring back to it. And it depends on, what works for you. And kind of your own experience with money and how you keep track of your life. So I highly recommend breaking big long time periods into either monthly, or you could do it bi-weekly too. If you want to say, hey, I need to save $300 a month, I get paid every 2 weeks, so maybe 150 from every paycheck, right? And that's the kind of thing where when you get paid, you receive your paycheck and you say, right off the bat, I'm going to take 150, I'm going to put it right on the Amex card. And that might be a little easier to do because you don't have to hope that you're going to have $150 left at the end of the 2-week period. You do that up front, right? We call that pay yourself first, although pay yourself first really means to put it into savings, but I'm going to equate it to paying off debt as well. If you pay your debt straight off the bat, that's knocking that out, which means you're going to save on the interest expense. And so same thing, same concept is if you pay yourself or you pay the high priority things right off the bat as soon as you get paid. You don't have to worry about if you're going to be able to afford them later. So we're down to the end here, monitoring the implementation. So if you're going to monitor your progress, you need to make sure that you are doing the things that you that you said you're going to do. And so I said a second ago, if you have a big, long, 1 year long goal, break it into months is perfect. And then how you review what you did is another important thing. And so if you are doing something monthly, you might, for us, check a box on a whiteboard. That's fine. For you, if that works for you, great. If you'd rather see something more visually, you can do that as well. And so we have a couple slides of, maybe you want to, if you do, this is 4 months, but you could do it for a whole year as well. And you can see, okay, my savings is increasing. My American Express card is going down because I'm making payments on it. My income, I want to see, maybe I'm paid hourly or I'm paid on commission. And so my income isn't the same every single month, but it's close, right? So I can put that on there and I can see, okay, here's kind of the trends. And then I would put in, this is from Excel. So all I did was type in numbers on Excel and create a graph, but you could do this yourself on Google Sheets, or you can do this by hand. You can just write it out with a pen and paper, whatever works for you, but you might want to graph and see where things are going over time. And see that, okay, I'm on the right track. Maybe, savings takes a dip because some emergency happened, right? And so I didn't include that in this graph, but if, let's say March, some kind of emergency happens and you see this line going up and then all of a sudden it goes down, you might say, okay, well, yeah, but the water heater exploded that month. And so we had to buy a new one and we weren't expecting that. And we had to pull it from savings. Those kinds of things happen, sure. But after that happens, you say, okay, I'm a little bit behind on what my goal was. I'm going to start over again from here and it's going to start trending up. So those kinds of things happen, but you just have to plan for that and say, okay, well, I'm going to have an emergency fund kind of set aside. The purpose of having the savings was so that I didn't have to, use a credit card to pay for that expense, that kind of thing. Another way you can do it is a table with actual dollar figures. This is the same table. This graph and this table of numbers represents the same information. It's just shown in a different way. And so I like to show people different options of, visually what works for you best. If you prefer to see it written out as numbers, great. If you prefer to see it as a graph, that's fine. Whatever works for you. I never judge anyone by what, works for them and the way their brain works. It doesn't matter which choice as long as it works for you and your circumstances. So some resources that you can use when you're doing the 7-step process. So the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has a budget worksheet. I'll kind of show this. I have to change my screen share here. But I will switch it to sharing my screen so you can see. Oop, then we'll go back here. So FTC has a monthly budget that you can use. Make sure that that's going good. Okay. So that you can kind of fill in, some of your costs here. If you want to use something that's already created, that's perfect. If you would rather do something in Excel, you can create one for yourself. Also, there's a website called investor.gov, and they have some financial planning tools that are useful. We're going to cover in future workshops things like Social Security and saving for retirement, but investor.gov has a bunch of great resources here as well. Compound interest calculators, Social Security estimator, all kinds of different things. Mutual funds, which is a type of investment, 529, which is a type of educational savings account. There's all kinds of different things on this website that you can utilize as well. And then lastly, Vanguard, which is an investment company, and I don't have any affiliation with Vanguard, but their website is pretty decent. Let me click there. Here we go. So Vanguard has a net worth worksheet that you can use as well. And so just like what we had said earlier, the assets that you have, the liabilities or debts that you have, and then the difference between those would be your net worth. And so any of those are perfectly fine to use. I'm gonna, hopefully PowerPoint seems to have failed on me here. I'm gonna, give me just a sec. Sorry about that. The other thing, and I'll talk as PowerPoint restarts for me, but I will also say, if you are at all worried about doing this for yourself and kind of doing this whole process yourself, it may be helpful to contact a financial planner. And that may or may not be perfect for everybody, but for some people is a good option. Let me go back here. There we go. And so do you need to hire a financial professional? Sometimes it depends. For people who have more complex situations, or if you need help in very particular areas like estate planning or taxes, then it might be a good idea to hire a professional. But if you're fairly, less complex and you're just looking at saving and budgeting, maybe not. It kind of depends. And so I like to kind of leave that up to you to decide, do I need somebody or not? But there's one thing I want to touch on is that there are many different kinds of financial professionals. And so financial planner is just one kind of a financial professional. You might also work with an insurance agent for things like life and health insurance or something like that. An estate planner, which is usually an attorney who would do things like creating a trust or helping you write out a will. An accountant or a CPA might help you with your taxes. And there are many others for all kinds of different topics. There's actually now, there are people whose sole focus is educational savings and 529s and Coverdell, which is a type of educational savings account. There's people who just focus on that and nothing else, right? And so there's a lot of different professionals that you could work with, and who you choose to work with, if anybody, depends on the kind of service that you need. And so one thing to look for financial planners specifically, somebody who's going to help you with budgeting and savings and probably investing, would be the type of compensation that they receive. And so in general, there's three major categories of compensation for financial planners. A fee-only financial planner is generally my recommendation, but I mean, everything's got some kind of subjective piece to it as well. So usually a fee-only financial planner is somebody who charges a flat rate. When I was a financial planner prior to working for Chico State, I was a fee-only financial planner. And so what I did is it was a monthly retainer. When someone worked with me, they paid the same amount every month, no matter what was going on in their life. Some financial planners will charge based on commissions, which is not fee only. So fee only means you pay a certain flat fee, whether or not you choose to take their advice. And that's it. That's the only fee you pay. And sometimes it's hourly, sometimes it's a retainer, like mine was monthly. If you pay someone on commissions, then they might sell a product to you. And that could be a mutual fund or an insurance product. And there's nothing wrong with that compensation model, but you just need to consider that the person trying to sell you a product might be incentivized to sell you that product because they get paid for it, whereas there may be some other product available that they don't get paid for, and so you might just want to consider that as an option. And then some financial planners also work on what's called an AUM fee. AUM stands for assets under management, and that's almost always going to be seen with somebody who manages investments for you. And so if someone manages your investment portfolio, like a retirement account, an IRA usually, they may charge you a percentage of the portfolio. And so if they're managing, to keep the math easy, if they're managing $100 and they charge a 1% fee, that would be a $1 fee. Usually it's charged yearly, so 1% per year would be a normal fee rate. Generally, somebody won't manage a $100 account. They'd be looking for more like $500,000 or something like that. And then fee-based is another term. So fee-based is someone who has kind of a combination of the two. They charge a flat fee, and then they also receive a commission based on, they might charge a flat fee for something and then sell other products. And that would be someone who maybe is a financial planner and an insurance agent at the same time, or something like that. And so those are just things to think about. There's no one of these that is just demonstrably or objectively better or worse than another. It depends on the circumstances, but I want you to be aware that there are different options available. And then also, if you're going to work with a professional, you might want to look at some of the different certifications or licensing that there are. I typically recommend the CFP, Certified Financial Planner. It's considered the gold standard. That's not me that says, I do say that, but it's not just me that says that. That's the general consensus of the financial planning community, is that CFP is kind of the top tier of financial planners. But there are other categories of certifications as well. The Chartered Financial Consultant, CFA, which is usually somebody who's going to be managing investments specifically. And then CLU is a Chartered Life Underwriter. That would be an insurance professional. And then the Series 65, which is a license, not necessarily a certification. Series 65 is from FINRA and the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so if someone's going to manage investments for somebody, they have to, at minimum, have a Series 65, but they could also have something called a Series 7. It doesn't necessarily matter, but they need to have some sort of licensing in order to manage investments for someone. And so my license, when I was a financial planner, I had the Series 65, which allowed me to manage investments, and in addition to doing financial planning. So future workshops that we're going to do as part of the REACH program, I talked about them a little bit at the beginning, but just so that you're aware, some future workshops will include topics on tax planning, retirement planning, paying off debt, credit scores, talking with kids about money, all kinds of other topics. And so I highly recommend you go to the REACH website, which we referenced earlier, to see the calendar of all the different workshops that are going to be presented over the coming months. And then this recording will also be available on there as well. And pre-recorded videos will be there also. And so I just want to close out with a quote and say, this is from Picasso. And he said, "Our goals can only be reached through the vehicle of a plan. There's no other route to success." And so just to kind of tie everything together from today, I wanted to say, creating a plan, creating some goals, implementing that plan, that's where you're going to get to success. You have to kind of, you say, plan the work and work the plan is kind of the process there. So thank you, everybody, for joining today. And I appreciate it, and take care.